just turn this over. So I turn it over, and what you always want to remember is you're going to put your fabric on the blank side.
Okay.
And you're going to stitch on the print side.
Makes sense.
Yep. So I'm going to turn this over, and I need to cover area 1. So I like to use a little bit of glue.
And just a regular old glue stick like for school supplies.
Exactly. Washable glue stick, it's perfect. And I just put a little bit of glue in here. And what that's going to do is just hold my piece in place. And I just want to make sure it covers the whole area and past all my stitching lines. And you can see I have a nice generous piece here.
Sure.
But it's, that way I make sure that I don't have any holes in my paper piecing when I'm done.
Nice.
Yeah. So then what I want to do is I want to fold my paper along this line. Now I like to use a little ruler that has this tapered edge, but you could just also use an index card. So what you do is you lay whatever you're using down, and then you just fold your paper back.
Okay.
And the thing to do with that is so that you can now trim your 1/4 inch seam.
Ah.
Right? So all this extra is going to go away. So this is really nice because it's got this little beveled edge or this lip edge. But now I can just go ahead and trim, ta-da, just like that.
Get some of the extra bulk out of there.
Exactly. It's also really helpful. Now let me fold this back. And now I'm going to turn it over. And the reason it's really helpful is now I know my seam allowance and I can just lay this edge to edge.
Excellent.
And now I know that the rest of this will fit because I know exactly where my seam is.
Gotcha.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place these here. And I like to use these flathead pins when I pin. And the reason is that you don't get that little bubble underneath your paper.
Nice.
Yeah, so I find the flathead pins are really nice for this. And I just pin far enough away from my line so that the pin's not underneath the seam.
Perfect.
Now you want to stitch for us?
Absolutely.
All right, of course, when you're paper piecing, you need that shorter stitch.
Right. And so what is your preferred stitch length for paper piecing?
I like to do like a 1.5, 1.6.
Okay.
And the reason is it makes a really nice perforation of the paper, and it's so much easier for the paper to get ripped out later.
Wonderful. And do you do any end stitch locking at all, or?
I don't. I just go past all the lines. So if this is going to go like into that seam allowance, I just go a little bit past the seam allowance usually. And then you can just take that pin out and give it a press.
All right. I really love the glue stick method too, just to hold everything secure. You don't have to worry about things shifting as it's moving to the machine or anything like that.
Oh, absolutely. Especially that first piece, because when you're flipping it over, you've got nothing holding it in place, and you don't want the pin yet, because then it just gets bulky.
Okay.
All right, perfect. So now, once we've got piece 1 and 2 in, we want to add piece 3. Now, if I wanted to, I could put a little piece of glue here as well to hold this in place. I often don't do it when it's a small piece, but like with our bigger unit, look how big these pieces are.
Huge pieces.
Yeah, so I probably definitely would glue those down. But this one, I'm probably just going to flip it over. So now I'm going to go back to the other side again. I'm going to look for the line now between piece 2 and piece 3.
Okay.
And I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm just going to lay my edge down so I can fold my paper back. If you notice your fabric comes with you a little bit, then I just put my finger here on the paper and give the fabric a tug.
Oh.
And it'll just flop right back down for you.
Just pulls that stitch back, eh?
Exactly.
Nice.
Yep. And then I'm just going to lay this down, trim my 1/4 inch seam again. Oh, it's always fun when you're using a new cutter, right? Figure out how.
It's a little different.
Always a little different, but this is nice. All right, now I've got my seam. I'll fold my paper back, flip this over, and I'm going to grab my piece 3, and I'm going to lay it down, making sure that it goes past the seam here and past the seam here. That looks good. Put a piece of pin in it. Ta-da! All right, off to you for sewing.
Okay. So now when you're working on these pieces, do you typically do one whole block at a time, or will you work on each segment at a time and kind of production line? What's your preferred method?
I usually production line it.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. So what I did find with these, though, that I was better off doing all my unit 1s at one time.
Okay.
And then my unit 2s, and that way I wasn't messing them up.
Especially having a different color placement between the
Exactly.
2 blocks. I'm sure that was helpful.
Yep.
Press again.
Very good. Yay!
There we go.
All right, we're going to do another one, just so we can go a little farther. All right, so now we just did piece 3, so I'm looking for the line between piece 3 and piece 4. Do the same thing. Lay this down, fold this back. If my fabric was sticking up, I just put my finger here and give it a tug if I need to. Because sometimes I get going with the stitching and I go a little far.
Right. Easy to do.
Yep.
We were talking about how it's so much easier to remove the paper if you use that shorter stitch length, but it's much more difficult to remove a stitch that's in the wrong spot. So you want to make sure that you're paying extra attention.
Yep. And I think the other thing that tends to happen, and I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I've had the fabric on the wrong side flop on me.
Oh, so it gets caught under the stitching where it doesn't belong.
Exactly. So I'm usually really good about, if I'm going to start stitching here, I'm usually really good about holding this
it.
as I go to the machine so that I
That's a
don't
smart
end
idea.
up with something that looks like that.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
there
a
you go.
great thing to point out. Okay.
Well, you know, I know all the mistakes because I've made them.
Exactly. Exactly. People think that when you make beautiful quilts, it's because you're a perfect sewer, but no, really. We know how to hide things, right?
Yep.
And
And we know how to fudge.
and we know what to look out for because we've made all the mistakes.
Exactly. Making mistakes is actually good because you learn from them.
Absolutely. I agree. Okay, we'll press this as well.
All right.
There we go. There you are.
All right. So I'm just going to show you how to lay the next piece, but then we'll go on to trimming. I
Okay.
think.
Because
Right?
this is an interesting piece, right?
Yes, it is. So now, you can see that I just cut rectangles for most of these, even though those shapes were different. Now for this one, this is a big triangle here. What I did was I cut an oversized square and cut it in half on the diagonal.
Okay.
So I'm actually going to lay down a triangle piece when I get there. Now, of course, first what I have to do is get this all ready and get rid of my seam allowance. So let me go ahead and do that. Just like that, get these guys out. Okay. So one of the things I like to do is if I'm going to lay down a triangle like this, I want to make sure that point's going to end up close to here.
Okay.
Because if it's off, then I might end up with a hole and a piece uncovered. So my trick is this. I actually take my ruler, could be this one or just a regular ruler, and I lay it down along this seam allowance here so it's straight and right at the point.
Okay.
And then I look for the point down here. So let me move this down a little bit. So I've got this going up to the point here, and if it's matching my point down here, I'm good.
Nice. It's not askew. and
It's
it will
not
be
skewed
stitched.
over.
Right.
But if I found that this triangle was over to the side, then I would just shift it over.